Hello, Catholic YouTube. Brian with City of the Immaculata. Glad to be back with you. Let me just get a few things in order here. Trying to get my life together. You know, it's funny, when I had this initially scheduled, I had it scheduled for last week, this particular live. And right before I went live this morning, I realized, excuse me, let me adjust this. I realized that due to circumstances, I had to push it forward, and now that it falling on the day that it falls on, the 25th, it's landing on the 2-year anniversary since I've done the Colby consecration to Our Lady, joining the Militia of the Immaculata, and it's just kind of one of those little moments in my life where I just kinda step back and just have to kind of chuckle at how Our Lady works. And this is it's probably meaningless to most of you, but it actually has quite a bit of meaning to me in my own life, because today I had planned to talk about Our Lady and the militia, and just the fortuitous, though maybe providential, fact that it landed on the Feast of the Annunciation, as well as this very significant date in my own life for consecration and drawing closer to Our Lady. And I will tentatively consider this something of a part two from the last lecture that I did. I called The Truth About Traditionalism. Today, though, I want to get more at the heart of where the real crisis exists. And I emphasize real there, all capital letters. You guys love how I'm the master of YouTube algorithms, right? Seriously though, the real crisis in the church, in the West anyways, in the northern hemisphere, loosely defining the West geographically, as I know that it's something of a vague, almost meaningless distinction, as it covers many parts of the planet, including parts of the global South. But the West conceptually, and last time, I dug into, I went after, I exposed some of the flaws of the sort of traditionalist mindset as chasing after a past that in many ways never existed, in order to solve problems that today really don't exist. Though there are significant and serious problems that exist today, the problems that some people seem to be trying to solve, I don't actually believe are, at the very least, at the root of the problems we need to be looking at. And one criticism I saw from the live that I did last week was that traditionalism as such has never been about a return to the material situations of the past. I saw a few people say that. And even though the person was actually kind of a jerk in the comments, to be fair to them, I would assume that they meant that traditionalism as such is more about cherry picking certain aspects of the past that we want to say were objectively good and attempting to bring them forward into a modern context. And that, I think, is what most people that would maybe identify as traditionalists would say. And while I do agree with that in theory, and I even discuss that in my talk way back that I did on actually the traditionalist movement, I don't think that one can so easily remove the historical context that produced certain customs or certain actions or notions or philosophies that people had from the material situations that they found themselves in. For one example, one ideal of the past I'd love to see a return to is a more clannish, more extended familial communities, but those are often born out of certain necessities and hardships of a certain particular way of life. And the tragedy of modernity is that in all of our luxuries, and I put luxuries in quotes, and all of our luxuries, we have gotten lazy, and people honestly vote with their lifestyles. People, including many that would identify as traditionalist, are not living communally like we once did. They're living at best with this vague notion of nuclear families, which is actually a very, very modern phenomenon. And so many people see the problem today, the crisis in the church, as one of modernity versus the past, or of this church versus that church, this denomination versus that denomination, left versus right, progressive versus traditionalist. And while I don't dismiss the severity of these things and some of the arguments that come forth from them, I don't really see any of that as the real crisis. The actual crisis in the church and in culture at large is honestly more opaque, and it's more hidden in the underbelly of modernity, not easily spotted or assessed. And my goal today is to introduce you to, but keep in mind this is a very broad subject, one that I'm actually working slowly on putting into a book, and I really don't hope to give any kind of exhaustive treatment here by any stretch. But to begin, we thought initially decades ago that as we begin to as access to information grew exponentially, and it has grown exponentially even in my own lifetime, that it would yield these amazing results. We thought we'd all by now be these big brained Thor god wizards traversing the galaxies, but what's actually happened is that there's so many options and so many opinions and so many voices that we've reached something of an intellectual stalemate. And it's emerged, and everyone watching from the sidelines that's not necessarily involved in the arguments themselves are left with this giant ball of uncertainty. And the uncertainty itself leads to oversimplified overcorrections, or at times, in some people, just a complete indifference to the problems altogether. Some people just kind of wash their hands of it and just say, I'm not going to involve myself in this because there doesn't seem to be any real solution to any of it. While other people are coming up with these oversimplified overcorrections that are just easily knocked down by the other side. Modernity itself has created a culture of extreme uncertainty. No one really knows anymore. No one even trusts their own intuitions, and it's endemic as far as I can see. Chesterton once made an observation that modernity was at a certain crossroads, where for one side you have people like Tolstoy, the Russian novelist, who is someone who refuses to choose either road because he wants to take both roads. The other side is someone like Nietzsche, the German philosopher intellectual who refused to take either option. Subsequently, both are left in the exact same place as a result. But then Chesterton says you have someone like St. Joan of Arc, who not only chose a path, but she shot down that path like a lightning bolt. So the question in my mind becomes then, what is it that leads some people to such a place of indecision and inaction? And what leads others, though a much smaller minority, to such conviction? And how do we emulate the latter instead of the former that we all seem to have adopted today? And I don't think that we can excuse within this discussion the influence of modern skeptical philosophy. Um, it's once said that philosophers control the world, but they do so from the grave. And what that means is that philosophers, these intellectual men and women that live up in their ivory towers that argue ideas back and forth with one another, in their own lifetime, generally don't see the fruit of their own ideas, where eventually those ideas tend to trickle down into culture, and they at times are quite revolutionary in how they change massive amounts of people's perceptions of reality. And the philosophies of men like Descartes and Hume and Kant, and the effects that their epistemology has had on modernity, it's really pulled the rug out from antiquity, and all of the assumptions that we had about reality, really from the Greeks forward up until about the time of Descartes. When you get to somebody like Hume, causality itself becomes something that we can no longer take for granted. Where the old world lifted where the old world drew man's mind inward and lifted it upward, today has left a vacuous void that, while promising us it would expand our capabilities to the outward regions of the universe, really seems to have done nothing but pull us inward and withdrawn into the state of absolute fear where people are afraid of their own shadows at this point. And you add something like a smart device and you take this philosophical paradigm that's existed for many decades, centuries at this point, at least in the West, and then you put a smartphone into people's hands and they're even more withdrawn now than they ever have been. Meanwhile, many people, those of us that should be focused on this, are instead at constantly at war with a dying culture of death. And I'm not saying that to be redundant. It literally is a culture of death, and it's a culture of death that is in the process of dying. So it's just instead of watching this Western culture and Europe and North America in particular from kind of a safe distance, we have decided to board the Titanic with them and duke it out. And look, I'm not going to sit here and have a philosophical debate as the Titanic is sinking on the Titanic. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, you know, infiltrating and preserving what we can from secular modern society or recovering what we can of it. I mean, the just on a practical level, for example, here in the United States, the overturn of Roe v. Wade was a monumental coup that has significant ramifications for the culture of life moving forward in the West. And if we save even a few thousand babies, all the more power from the work that's been done there. But at the same time, we really do have to be realistic. Even something like Roe, sending that decision back to the states is hardly a reason that we should be doing victory laps. So what I want to do here today is to help you guys rethink some of this and give you another approach to the cultural war that is well underway. One where we in the dying West, particularly, stop relying on ourselves and on our little tiny groups of people, and where instead reinstate this massive, stable structure that we have at our disposal called the Catholic Church, where by the sheer ontological reality of it unites us to members globally, as well as unites us to members supernaturally to those of the Church triumphant. And we are going to get into it today, my friends. So kind of strap yourselves in for this. I want to take a look. We'll be taking a look at Colby, at Bonaventure. I want to discuss the house on the rock in a way to get ourselves out of this rut that so many people have found themselves in. And while this may seem abstract as I'm presenting the idea to you, the beautiful thing is that it is actually very pragmatic and it's easy and it's doable for many of you. And honestly, it's the whole entire reason that I began this channel, which is why I have to kind of look back and chuckle at the fact that this live falls on this date. Because if you go back to my initial videos, the very first videos that I did on this channel, it was a series of videos that my wife and I did leading up to March 25th, 2022. And I kind of didn't know what I was going to do with the channel, but I knew I wanted to consecrate and I knew I wanted to document it. And so now, here 2 years later, here I am with this channel, as small and tiny as it is, but still. Colby, Maximilian Kolbe lit a fire in me. I have no other way to describe it. You know, I have been in the Catholic faith for 10 years now at this point. Gosh, 11 years at this point. And there's something about that Franciscan movement of the will. While the intellect has its place, it's a movement of the will. Bonaventure's itinerarium, the journey of the mind to God, is this from the vestige to the image up to the similitude. Colby comes along many centuries later and says that we need to incorporate this into the life of the church by any legitimate means necessary, he said. And this is what the City of the Immaculata is all about. And I mean that in the sense that if you look at the Neo Capellano of the City of the Immaculata that Colby himself founded, I clearly have tried to model some of what I'm doing in this channel off of what, and I do not put myself anywhere. Colby is the patron of my channel. I venerate him. I ask for his intercessions every time before I go live on this channel, but I do not even pretend to think that I emulate his sanctity or the amount of um the 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 efficacy of his missionary work. I don't even pretend to put myself in those same shoes, but I know what his goal was with the city of the Immaculata, and he says, by any means necessary, by any forms of communication that we have at our disposals, we need to be using and taking advantage of. So again, it's just kind of fortuitous to me that I think that today this lecture would fall on this day. So the first thing that I want to touch upon is, how do we actually go about getting our footing as Catholics? There is no point in attempting anything in any of this unless you have the conviction of a Saint Joan of Arc, where so many others are going to be at that crossroads, making, being indecisive the entire way, and Saint Joan of Arc has picked that path and she shoots down it like a lightning bolt. And while it may seem like an exercise in the obvious, the way that we do this from the beginning, it's so glaringly simple as to almost mystify. But you absolutely must go back to the theological virtue of faith itself. And you would probably laugh at me for saying it, but I have eyes to see. And much of this massive state of unrest and uncertainty that comes with the rise of social media and the rise of all of these opinions and noise and the sort of vacuous void that it leaves people in is a rise is excuse me, it's not a rise, it's due to what I see as a troubling lack of the theological gifts. And you could go right back. Do I have it? Oh, do I have it handy? My son is about to do his first communion, so we've been using the old. Dare some of you folks say that I'm not a traditionalist, huh? We've been using the old St. Joseph's First Communion Catechism, and every morning he's been praying for an act of faith, an act of hope, and an act of charity. And honestly, I think some of you folks need to sometimes go back to these kids' models. And I'm putting myself in that too, because sometimes we get so lost in things, we lose the absolute, like, bare minimum of what the faith teaches. But an act of faith, oh my God, I believe in all of the truths what the Holy Catholic Church teaches because you have made them known. That's not a gift. That's not a gift that we acquire by our own natural capabilities. The theological gifts are a gift that comes from grace. And what does it allow for? Well, let's think back for a moment. For those of you that heard my lecture on Bonaventure's three modes of theology, Bonaventure gives us three separate, distinct modes of theology. And even though all of theology for Bonaventure is practical, it all serves to the same end. There are three distinct modes. There's symbolic, there's academic, or also known as proper theology, and then there's mystic theology. And so, what is the symbolic? That's kind of what I really want to focus on today. The symbolic is the symbolic theology is the creed, it is the sacraments, it's the liturgy, it is the dogmas of the church. It's the things that we know for certain are true. And when we sit down and we make an act of faith, when we say, I believe all of the truths what the Holy Catholic Church teaches, we're saying, I believe all of the symbolic theology. And this will not work if you do not have what I'm saying next will not work if you do not have the supernatural gift of faith. Faith is the firm foundation, it's the good soil. And you have to participate in the things that confer the grace that give you faith. With grace, you shore up your faith. Your allegiance to the truth and to the Catholic Church and your convictions in them grow. Now, admittedly, we're dealing with elements within the Catholic Church today, especially from certain progressive quarters that, as I've stated, are dying off, but they have a very loud voice. And many of them are trying to undermine our symbolic theology. And I absolutely acknowledge that. I know it's a problem. They want you to question our creeds, our dogmas, all of the various things that we rest firmly on. They challenge it, they question it. But for now, just for a moment, just forget about those people. Remember the Titanic and the sinking ship analogy. You don't necessarily want to be on a ship having a battle with them as it's going down, unless you're really truly certain in your own faith and you have a chance of pulling a few of them off in the lifeboat, or you're just ready to go down with the ship and sacrifice yourself to the greater cause. But we know, because the Catholic Church, whom we have already accepted on the principle of faith, on the theological virtue of faith, has told us that these are the things that we need to keep without question. And keep in mind, do not lose sight here. Symbolic theology, per Bonaventure, is the firm foundation, the things which we know are true by the light of faith. And as you already may see here, the beauty of this is that it's a self-sustaining process. It's circular. It's a recapitulation, right? How do we shore up the conviction of our own faith in the teachings of the church? By participating in them. And how do we participate in them? We participate in them through penance, through the graces of matrimony and holy orders, through the Eucharist, principally through the liturgy, right? The Mass. All of this is a process by which we shore up our faith and our conviction in the things which we believe. And really, guys, think of the beauty of this. The church herself gives you what you need, the things that you're so hungry for, that you spend all of this time on YouTube or in books trying to figure it all out. The church provides it to you for free on a plate. All of the conviction and faith and certainty that you need to move forward in life as good Catholics is provided to you. And brothers and sisters, if you want to figure it out, turn not to the academic theology first, but turn to the symbolic theology. The symbolic, in turn, helps you to strive toward the mystical unitive theology, which is what we all should be ultimately yearning for. So many hearts, so many of my brethren out there watching you, man, your hearts are restless, constantly restless. They're not resting in the Lord. And look, I don't think that even means that we need to be like laid back in the recliner with our feet propped up drinking a beer. That isn't what Augustine means when he says our hearts rest in the Lord. A saint could be in the most high stress, crazy, chaotic situation. Think of the absolute worst situation, as bad as you could make it, and throw the saint in the mix, and they may be active, they may be caught up in it, but for their faith, for their certainty, for their convictions, they're absolutely resting. And it's all so easy, right? It's right at your fingertips. I see so many people online talking about how the Christian and the Catholic faith is so hard and it's so hard. And you need to get out of that mindset. Christ said his yoke is light. You don't have to take on this mountain debt of time and action. The gifts are given to us, they're provided by the church. They would be hard were we Pelagian, right? If you notice the whole thing about the Pelagian controversy, many people don't remember this about Pelagians and Pelagius and his beliefs. They were a very ascetical group of people. They believed that you needed to have the absolute most extreme penances that you could imagine because the faith was hard, right? So if we were Pelagian, then yes, I would agree with the Catholics out there that the faith is hard, but we're not Pelagian. We rest upon the certainty of faith, and Jesus Christ has given us a light yoke. Now, faith, a virtue which is absolutely necessary for our salvation, our salvation, is more than just intellectual assent. We need Catholics who are not only convinced, not only certain, but acting in the world to bring about the queenship of Our Lady. And Holy Mother Church has given us the way forward on this as well. The way that you're going to do this, guys, is we're going to do this through consecration, by the unity of our wills to the will of Our Lady. You see, a lot of people admire St. Maximilian Kolbe as the great martyr of charity, the man who gave his life up for another, who said, I am a Catholic priest, and stepped forward in the concentration death camps. Many of you don't realize that Maximilian Kolbe's consecration, if you even know it exists, is more than just a pious act. It's actually a military oath. That's why he named it a militia. That's why he named the members knights, because going back all the way to St. Francis, many of you who know St. Francis's story will remember that early on in St. Francis's life, he wanted to be a knight. And so, in that chivalric sense, there's always existed this mentality within the Franciscan order that there is a militant aspect to the faith and to the charisms of the order. And with supernatural implications here within the militia of the Immaculata, this will allow you the believer, to do more than you would ever be able to accomplish on your own. Again, look back on this channel. Look at how it started for me. I started with consecration. And so this isn't just hollow tripe and nonsense coming from me. These are like what little I have accomplished here, what good I have done, it's all due to Our Lady. And I'm pointing to her. You guys can't see her, but we have the sacred excuse me, we have the Immaculate Heart right here. And it's all due to her work. This is why I have them right behind me. I want Our Lady looking down upon me as I turn and do things on this channel. I've done nothing here without her. If I've done anything wrong, those have been where I have left her. But anything that I've done with her has been for the good of the faith and all for her son. And her mediation, I along with Colby believe true Marian mediation in the world will bring about the eschaton that we all await. No, I'm not sitting here. I'm not, a Joachim Fiorist who's sitting here saying that these things we've entered some age where the end times are now. It's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes. Maybe not for some time yet, but that doesn't matter. It's not for us to know the hour. Our job is to win souls. And you cannot win souls if you do not have certainty in your faith. These same people out here who are saying, why are people leaving the faith? Why aren't more people becoming Catholic? Are the same people that are absolutely on like shaky, rocky grounds. And all of this plays right into St. Bonaventure on divine illumination, which I want to spend a lot of time in the near future on this channel discussing Bonaventure and divine illumination. It's Bonaventure has a certain concern with certitude and judgment and how we come to knowledge that absolutely plays right into all of this. But now I know what you guys are thinking. How can I be assured, I as in you out there, that I'm not being dumb when I simply accept something on faith? That's asking a lot of a person in this post-Kantian world where we need to trace every little single minute point back as far as we possibly can. I would love to tell you, but for the most part, you're gonna have to wait on that. It really does kind of come down to divine illumination, tracing our steps back to the divine ideas, which per Augustine, per Bonaventure, are why we as humans are able to go out into the world, are we able to make judgment, we're able to make judgments, have certainty, and ultimately be able to act. We have a foundation for this stuff, guys. I'm doing my part as slow and as incapable as I am at times, trying to bring some of this stuff to the surface, some of that old medieval scholastic theology. There's other great people doing really great work out there as well. I just saw recently Christian Wagner and the guy that does the Unionist Initiative. I think they had a really great little channel collaboration that they're working on with some of these old great spirituals. It looks like they drew recently from How to Get Out of Sin. That's the kind of stuff that we need, guys. This is the stuff that we need our Catholic brothers and sisters out there making and creating and producing this kind of content. We have to get out of this cycle, this spiral where we're just constantly being drained, and that's leading people honestly out the doors of the church. We need to be, as again, going back to Chesterton, we need to be centrifugal, not cyclical, to break out, to be that lightning bolt like St. Joan of Arc. And personally, I believe that the Franciscan tradition offers this to you. Divine illumination anticipated, sort of preemptively adverts the mire that Cartesian thought has plagued modernity with. So when you have these like foundational elements set in place, when you have sure footing, then you're able to make moves and steps and work in ways that you never thought possible and imaginable. And I don't care what form it takes for you, maybe you want to seek deeper into the academic theology that we all love to parcel out and argue about. Maybe you want to focus more on the unitive and sanctifying aspects of the faith. That's an important one that many of us forget. Maybe you want to focus on going out into the world and evangelizing people or caring for the poor. doing all of these things in the new way of evangelizing that Holy Mother Church has asked of us. And it all can be done if you were to just back up and get this first part right. I'm absolutely convinced that the one of the major reasons modernity is so dangerous is because Satan has undermined our footing. If you talk, I've never been a rock climber, but I knew some rock climbers. If you talk to them, rock climbers will tell you if you're on a ledge that's, let's say, whatever, a foot, 2 feet extended outwards, if that ledge is 3 feet off of the ground, you as a person with certainty will walk right across it with no problem. But you take that same ledge and you put it up, I don't know, 100 feet up in the air, 200 feet up in the air, and people are going to be wobbly and shaking. But it's the exact same footing, it's the exact same ledge. So much of what we have to do is think about these things. Satan has made us, we've maybe like lifted that ledge up in modernity to crazy heights, but it's the same ledge and our footing is the same and it can be stabilized. And this is why I think secularism, both left and right, is so utterly dangerous to people and souls because there's no such thing as a secular system as a functioning independent mode operating in a society. I do believe that there is secularity, as John Duns Scotus teaches, where we can, as humans, make choices based on free acts of the will, making a decision on something that neither graces the soul nor adds to our demerit, right? Like a silly example, if I'm going to have orange juice or milk, that doesn't affect my sanctity one way or the other. But there's also something called secularism, and this claims objectivity in the world and in society. And secularism is actually an ideology that has, I think, undermined most of Catholics' convictions in the truths of the faith that they once stood on, because secularism has come along and say that all ideas, all beliefs have equal footing in the social arena. And in a society where you have competing epistemologies, competing core beliefs, ultimately one side or the another is going to win. And so the question, I think, this would be a long discussion. I'm derailing a little bit, but the question ultimately comes down to, with a secular society, which side do you want to see ultimately triumph? Right? It's going to be the Catholic Church, or it's not going to be the Catholic Church. It's going to be some other. And we can't let others, even if they're well meaning people, even if they're Catholics, because of their good intention, leave these vacuums that lead to the destruction of people and societies. This is honestly, I think this is the failure of conservatism. Because what happens in a truly secular society is that one extreme ends up winning the day. You look at somebody like Lenin, you look at somebody like Hitler, they, like Lenin, for example, if you follow the trajectory of what was happening when the Tsar, what's the word I'm looking for? When the Tsar gives up his throne, they initially went to what's called a provisional government. And the provisional government lasted for several years. And the provisional government from 1905 to 1917 was an attempt to secularize Russia. Lenin absolutely loved it. It gave him free reign. It left a vacuum and it gave him free reign to step in and usher in the Bolshevik Revolution. Hitler with the same thing. The Weimar Republic was the most unstable form of government you can imagine, where one side was constantly toppling over the other. And once the Nazis were officially elected into power, they just came in and did away with the whole idea of secularism altogether. As Catholics, I think it's criminal that we sit idly by and wait for some secular party, left or right, to come and overthrow this sort of so-called free market of ideas that we live in, and will eventually will lead to the unleashing of unfettered men to prey upon society. So the idea here is, do we advance the cause of the church and government as well as in culture? That's a long discussion. And look, I don't really want to come along in this channel and advocate for one party system, where I think the Catholic Church does right and sort of giving you those fundamentals, those foundations, the symbolic roots that we rest upon, to where no matter what culture, no matter what government we find ourselves under, I believe that when the symbolic theology is the basis for all of us, the sure footing that we stand on, it's from there that we can proceed with the healthy dialect of left and right. where left and right, if Catholics were truly healthy within a certain paradigm, left and right could challenge one another, lift each other up, argue with one another, but all for the advancement of Holy Mother Church and the kingdom. And that's really where the difference in all of this is. So to reiterate, Bonaventure says there's three modes of theology. There's a proper academic theology, which is the theology where we argue about ideas, right? What is justification? What is justification's kind of settled. What is predestination, right? There's competing ideas for what predestination is. And a lot of the times you'll find certain ideas within certain schools, right? You guys are familiar with this. This is what Bonaventure calls academic or proper theology. Then we have what's called symbolic theology, which is the things that the church has decided this is the faith. These are the things that we are to believe. And there is no, despite what all of the progressives may come along and say, there is no coming along and questioning this and challenging this. That's symbolic theology. The ultimate goal of all of it is to lead people to a sort of unitive theology, which, if you read the Triple Way or if you read Bonaventure on the Mind's Journey to God, is this unitive move where we are actually learning about God in this unitive sense, as all Christians, our faith being a practical faith, all Christians are ultimately to approach this unitive way of learning about God. And all of that is made possible with the help of Our Lady and a consecration to her. One, she's the mediatrix of all graces, right? So the graces that she hands out, Colby saying, by unifying yourself with her, you have greater access to these graces that she provides, as well as you can become a conduit for those graces for other people. So we unite ourselves to her, and through her to her son, and through her son, the ultimate mediator between God and man, between man and the Father, we get to the ends of theology, that unitive that I've been speaking of through this process. And I want to end today just with a few quotes from Colby. Colby is much better speaking at these things than I would ever be for you guys. And this is from the Colby Reader. It's just a collection of some of his letters and essays. And he says here, only the certainty that one does not belong to the Militia Immaculata because of one's own will, which can be inconsistent, and one's own reasoning, which can be mistaken, but in accord with and because of blind obedience, which is an important thing, we have to talk about blind obedience at some point, is the unshakable foundations. All the objections and adversity can distress, but never break us. Only a contrary order of a superior will be able to change us. And even then, we will never say that we made a mistake by first carrying out the superior's yes, but rather that at his first yes was the good thing to do because God and our mother wished it. So, and now his no is a good for the same reason. We are tools in the hands of the Immaculata. She should give us the orders. Certainty is something that we can have only through holy obedience. And one more. Quote, such expressions as servant, son, slave, thing, or property are beautiful, but we desire something more. We desire to be hers without any reservation. We include the spirit of these expressions, and more than that, we will adopt any new ones that can and may be invented. In a word, we belong to her, the Immaculate. And what Colby says is that there's this degree of certainty that comes along through the mediation, through consecration. Look, I have to like self-promote here. I'm getting like a little bit frustrated at times when I'm like talking to people online. There's been some stuff online that's really caused me a lot of consternation recently, but at times I don't have time to like go through all of the various things that I've already discussed. So I want to like point you to places where I've discussed it already. And then I get accused of, you're trying to self-promote. You're trying to self-promote. But it's really just my attempt to say, like, this, if you want a fuller detailed explanation, I haven't finished, it's taken me a long time. I've started a series I've got a playlist somewhere. It's only 2 videos yet on Colby and consecration and the purpose of mediation and the certainty and the conviction and the things that it gives us. And I plan to finish that. It's hugely important work on the work that I do on this channel. I point you to that. That's really all that I have for this lecture. We're coming up on 45 minutes here. I hope you guys find this stuff helpful. I hope I haven't lost you in the thread of all of this. You know, I tonight I haven't really discussed it with my wife, but I think we're going to go ahead. The church isn't open for us tonight. We would otherwise go to the church and renew yearly so far. This is the second year we have renewed our consecration to Our Lady, and I think if my wife is game, we're going to go ahead and do that tonight on this channel. We'll probably just set up here at the home altar, and as you guys can see, we have the Sacred and Immaculate Heart, and we will consecrate tonight, renew our consecration. And there's real purposes behind this stuff. It's not just this like pious thing that old women do. There's like a real purpose behind all of this. Colby asks that we wear the miraculous medal. I keep the miraculous medal on every day, and there's an intention behind this stuff that goes beyond him just being this like nice pious guy that just happened to do this great courageous act at the end of his life. All of the stuff that he did was a lead up towards that great courageous act, and they're not unseparated from they're not separated from each other. They're directly entwined. The work that Colby did absolutely made him ready and to be a martyr and a witness of such, probably the great martyr of the 20th century, right? So anyways, guys, I hope you appreciated that. I see no comments. I'm going to assume that everything has been clear and concise, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed the new intro